Travel is more than just ticking off countries. It's about the people, the culture, the food, the moments. I'm Pippa Hudson, and on Wonder the World, I invite you to join me every week as we explore destinations both near and far, with the help of fellow adventurers who share their unique travel stories. Listen to my podcast wherever you get them.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking. ABSA is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025. Good evening, welcome to The Money Show. I'm Stephen Grootes. Just a moment ago, President Cyril Ramaphosa arriving at the White House. President Donald Trump did come out to meet him. They exchanged a fairly cordial handshake before Trump did, in the way that leaders so often do, turn to the door and invite his counterpart to come into the White House. So the meeting, we presume the working lunch, we understand it is now going to be underway between the US President Donald Trump and our President Cyril Ramaphosa. So as the formal program, as it's been shared with us, shared with the media, shared with our team at the White House tonight, is expected to unfold. We do expect this to go on until at least 6:45 our time, so call it 35 minutes or so from now. At that point, we expect the media to be allowed into the Oval Office, and that's when we should be able to bring you live from the White House the conversation as it unfolds between Ramaphosa and Trump. I don't need to remind you of everything that rests on this. You've heard it all over the last few days. We'll obviously bring that to you live. Our team is there, and we've got various role players involved to speak to you as well. The main story, other than that, of course, is the budget. The Finance Minister on the line for you. We'll hear from him in just a moment. Also, the SARS Commissioner tonight. Good to hear from you on 011 883 0702 and 021 446 0567.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
I'm fairly certain you've heard most of the headlines from the budget already. The Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, very explicit. This is not an austerity budget. He says there is no increase in VAT. There is an increase in the fuel levy. The Treasury is expecting SARS to get more money. Also a promise to cut down on wasteful spending, to cut programs that don't deliver value for money, and to improve the way government spends its money. Well, the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, is on the line for you now. Minister, good evening. I really do appreciate the time after what I imagine has been a fairly long day. Firstly, how important was it simply to present the budget and to do it knowing you had the political support to do it? Do you believe that should restore the credibility of government and the coalition?
Look, I don't know. That is a relative issue, which depends on individual or institutions' perspective, who may decide whether the GNU is credible or not. But I would imagine that the budget, by all intents and purposes, is credible. The test is there you lose different tests. Does the budget meet the fiscal sustainability? Yes. Is there a confirmation of that even before it was tabled? Standard & Poor has already given a heads up in terms of their appreciation of what we've been saying. From that fiscal sustainability side, it is. Then there's another issue. Is it growth-oriented? Which is another test, which I would say part of the expenditures announced today contribute to. If properly executed, they will give us the required growth. The third test of credibility is it redistributing? The answer is yes. 61% of this budget is going to provide really support to the social wage and therefore to the poor.
Okay, so, from what you say, it passes those tests, but just on the numbers, there's no VAT increase, there's still a revenue hole. You'll get some money from bracket creep, you'll get some money from the increase in the fuel levy. You expect SARS to get another 20 billion rand or so, and SARS has given us every reason to have faith in them, but aren't you asking quite a lot? 20 billion rand when it's already been able to increase its enforcement quite significantly over the last few years?
let's distinguish between two things, or 2 years. SARS increase, what we're talking about, is about the next fiscal year. What we're saying, potentially we'll have to increase taxes by 20 billion next year, assuming that SARS does not meet its promise of between 20 to 50 billion next year. That's next year. That amount we're talking about from SARS of between 20 and 50 billion rand is not penciled in the current fiscal year.
Okay, I think I'm with you. Thank you for that. There's obviously a lot of other things going on, and one of them is around the fuel levy. And I suppose I understand why you would go for the fuel levy. There hasn't been an increase there for 3 years. You need the money. International oil prices are down, so the amount that people are paying for fuel is actually lower now than it was, say, a year ago. But it is also a tax on the economy, and you make the point that this is a growth budget. I mean, I understand why you've chosen the fuel levy, but I don't think a fuel levy really, an increase in the fuel levy, hopes with a kind of growth budget. Doesn't that actually go against a growth budget?
The problem with any tax, name any, has got an implications on growth. If we were to taxing the income tax, it also poses the disposable income people have and its implication on consumption. The same argument would go for company tax. The same argument would go for any other tax. Here, the challenge you have if you sit as a fiscal authority is what is the best option in the current environment and circumstances. And I think in the current environment, the option of going for the fuel levy is the best one in the circumstances. It may have an impact on growth, no doubt about that, like any other tax. So those are some of the trade-offs you make in the budget process.
There's a big promise of reform, and the presidency and the treasury, so I imagine yourself in a way, you'll identify wasteful programs and you'll cut them. And that has got to be good news. That's what should happen. I do worry a little bit, though, about the political process of that, because you're now going to have to say to people, this project or this program or maybe even this government department will no longer exist. And isn't that going to lead to really an incredible fight? I suppose I'm asking you a question really about the political will of yourself and of the president to do this.
In the speech, I make the point that political support is going to be critical because there's going to be a resistance in government and institutions. I make that point. I'm saying, but I'm comfortable because the president, the deputy president, and fellow cabinet members, on the 14th, there was unanimity that this is the direction we need to take.
So people say that, you believe them. This is going to happen. We're going to see a proper process of budgetary reform now in South Africa. I mean, I know there have been reform efforts before, there have been spending reviews before, but from what you say, we're going to see real change now.
Correct.
Okay. Going forward, putting a budget together, so you made the point that we've all learned a lot. We've had a sort of front row seat to how a budget can be created during a coalition government and how difficult that's been, and I'm sure it's been very difficult for you personally. But going forward, you will probably have to involve more people, more consultation than in the past. What kind of system are you going to use? Are you looking at a big change to the budgeting process for next year and maybe even as early as the medium-term budget policy statement?
I think that we must distinguish between what one would call constitutional responsibility of the fiscal authorities, which will not be tampered with in budget processes. Both enshrined in terms of Section 77 of the Constitution and Section 213 of the Constitution. Those things rest with fiscal authorities. That's what the Constitution enjoins us. But the key question in the execution of those functions, can the fiscal authority canvass as much views as possible so that everybody must feel to have been consulted? In other words, we'll be tabling the medium-term budget policy statement in October, which sets kind of the parameters for the next 3 years. In setting those parameters for the next 3 years, what should happen between now and October? And my view is that between now and October, we should have created a process where Parliament and cabinet colleagues, provinces, and so on contribute to that framework we're likely to be created, will be tabling before Parliament.
The risk, of course, and you have no control over this, I don't blame you for this at all, but the risk is that it can turn into a huge political fight over, this party may say, we'll only vote in favor of the budget if we get this, so there'll be patronage there. It's going to make the whole process a lot more difficult.
Let me just say, that process will be a consultative process. It's not going to be a decision-making process, okay? What that means is that all of us, the political parties, everybody else will be making suggestions on what the budget look like. In the final analysis, the fiscal authorities, in having consulted, has got to construct a budget they're going to table before Cabinet. And Cabinet then must make the final judgment call. And having made that final judgment call, and then it will go to be tabled in Parliament.
Minister,
of course, Parliament.
I must apologise, sir. The only person I'll interrupt you for is, in fact, the President. That meeting with Donald Trump in the Oval Office live now.
Travel is more than just ticking off countries. It's about the people, the culture, the food, the moments. I'm Pippa Hudson, and on Wonder the World, I invite you to join me every week as we explore destinations both near and far, with the help of fellow adventurers who share their unique travel stories. Listen to my podcast wherever you get them.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, the sounds of the Oval Office there, and we're just going to see if there are any more questions. Note that feed has now been cut by the White House. Thank you for joining. It says, well, the most interesting, in some ways astonishing, in some ways maybe calming, maybe not, kind of meeting that one could have heard of. You with The Money Show. I'm Stephen Grootes. I think in a way, we could probably agree the meeting seemed to go rather well, seemed to start well, seemed in many ways to be President Ramaphosa being able to at least say what he felt he needed to say. Clearly, looking back, the idea of having South Africa's top golfers in the room may be a masterstroke. Certainly made Ramaphosa stand up, pay attention, made Trump stand up, pay attention. Perhaps also, I think, taking the agriculture minister, the leader of the DA, John Steenhuisen. But who could have expected that President Trump, the leader of the United States, would play a whole number of clips of what is now our fourth biggest political party leader, Julius Malema, to President Ramaphosa? I mean, clearly a sort of staged moment in some ways, a very difficult moment, I think, in many ways for President Ramaphosa, and of course a huge amount coming from it. And I suspect also that we're going to hear a lot of commentary around all of this. I would like to know what you think on 011 883 0702 021 446 0567.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking. ABSA is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025. All right, let's get some reaction to all of this. Professor Bonang Mohale, listening and watching to that along with you. Bonang, good evening. It seemed to start fairly well. How do you judge President Ramaphosa and President Trump, and who could have prepared to see so many clips from Julius Malema?
So I think it's a classical case, Stephen, of seek first to understand before you are understood. So the first lesson for me is we are not in the top 5 things that keep Trump awake at night. What with 2 global wars, he has substantially increased uncertainty. The trade wars with China, not just the rest of the world, where tariffs have become a new currency. At the back of weakening U.S. consumer, where globalization has not benefited the U.S. middle class, where manufactured goods, i.e. the supply side of the economy, rules, where the US of A is at its most borrowed its history and driven by deficits. They are spending more than they are earning. And where the solution is very simple: increase growth, cut in expenditure rather than just raise taxes. So it looks like we are back to just 3 big countries that are potentially carving up the rest of the world, increasing nationalism in the US, where protectionism, not just national security, is the issue. And the modus operandi is simple: destroy the woke institutions and increase deregulation. This is the time when less than 5% of the population is holding the rest to ransom. So for me, the position for China and India originally, and it still stands true today, were to be low-cost manufacturers who relied on the U.S. for capital and technology that can be withdrawn at will in the event you misbehave. Africa was meant to be a supplier of raw materials, plant only export crops, and import food so that Africa can be starved by withdrawal of food if it was misbehaving. So now it looks like we have forgotten that original plan, and now we want to convince somebody who clearly has made his mind. His problem is the US of A, not here at home in our shores. So we are just collateral. We should have been, I think, concise, precise, and clear as daylight. That's what we needed, Stephen.
Professor Bonang Mohale, thanks very much indeed. Of course, former chair of Business Unity South Africa. Let's hear from Larry in Lenasia. Larry, hi. You were watching and listening to that. How do you think Ramaphosa did?
I think he was brilliant. He was a clear strategist. Even the team he put together. You see, it was very, very important for especially the killings that were taking place, and especially when they played that clip about the graves that they were there, right? It was Steenhuisen who made sure to say, no, he's not aware of these kind of things as well. You understand? But I think end of the day, the strategist came out. He showed his leadership style. I think it was just great. What I was worried about my worry was during the course of the day and yesterday, our own South Africans wanted our president to be treated like dirt. And I think that worried me about, it just worried me because, normally there's that patriotic kind of thing. It didn't come up from our people. They wanted him to get the same treatment like the guy from Ukraine.
Yeah.
You understand? But here I must say to you, well done, President. Whatever comes out, you've tried your best. You've put the country first, and you were honest.
Larry in Lenasia, thank you. Vusi in Krugersdorp, how do you feel tonight?
Stephen, good evening to you. I really didn't expect what unfolded in that clip as I was watching. But I need to really commend the calmness and the strategy and the negotiating skills that our president does possess. But however, I've got few areas that I felt like, this was never supposed to be discussed live on air. It was supposed to be discussed behind closed doors, and coming in front and then just giving us reflection on the resolution that was taken behind closed doors. Because I honestly feel like the delegates that Cyril Ramaphosa has brought along with him, yes, it was very good. All of them, they were mentioning one common thing, of which is the problem of crime in South Africa. It affects all races. This is not only about just only the whites getting killed. Even black people are killed. And so it's a problem that we're having in our country. But I really need to commend the great negotiating skills that our president does possess, and his calmness threw it out. I mean, who would have expected him to dealt with this matter? But again, I was a little bit disappointed on John's statement there when we're speaking, because somehow I feel like we don't need to be lashing out people's name, especially, or maybe those political figures of which they were playing videos. We understand the cases of that particular political organization, but I felt like it was supposed to have taken a different posture. But they did very good, yeah.
All right, Vusi, thanks very much indeed. Chaba in Centurion, I mean, are you feeling as positive as everyone else?
I'm feeling very, very positive. The president and his team did very, very well, not only for the president, but for the country. And the years of the president of solving things during negotiations have borne us big fruits today.
Chaba and Centurion, thanks very much indeed. All right, so you heard President Cyril Ramaphosa. You heard perhaps a lot more from the US President Donald Trump. Also, you heard, of course, from some of our golfers who would have thought they would end up in the Oval Office. And I imagine there'll be a discussion about the role that they've played. Ernie Elsretief Goosen. And then perhaps a very interesting contribution as well from Johan Rupert, and just making the point about crime in South Africa. We do not know what's going on behind closed doors now, but that is the meeting in the Oval Office. I'm not expecting at this point that there will be another sort of discussion in public. Certainly that went on for a long time, 55 minutes or so by my count. The other news today, of course, is around the budget. My apologies to Enoch Godongwana for interrupting you to listen to the President. You're with The Money Show. It's a very big evening. It's 7:30.
The Money Show.
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DSTV channel 856.
Business Unusual is brought to you by Business Outsurance. Visit outsurance.co.za to switch and save today. Well, you've just seen that most extraordinary meeting in the White House involving President Cyril Ramaphosa, the US President Donald Trump, and of course then quite a long list of other South African people, including golfers and Johan Rupert. Hywel George is the Director of Investments at Old Mutual Investments. Hywel, good evening. I mean, it's quite unusual to take golfers into a meeting, and yet I think it worked for President Ramaphosa.
Stephen, good evening, and good evening to your listeners. I think it did work. I thought it was a good move. President Trump is keen on his golf, as we all know, and I think it just took maybe the edge off things. It was certainly a fairly chaotic engagement. The scheduling was actually for private meetings first and then the press. So I was surprised to see the press first. But I think that's President Trump's style, to throw things up in the air and just see what lands. The visuals in the meeting were, quite uncomfortable, certainly for some. But I think our president was actually pretty firm and whilst being charming. I actually thought he did very well.
I mean, the main thing, if you're in that position, we all saw what happened to Volodymyr Zelensky, is to avoid the fight. And the temptation for Ramaphosa to stand up and shout, "You're just wrong, President Trump," must have been immense. And yet the temperament, the EQ, to not do that is maybe one of the more impressive things.
Yes, indeed, I did think he did well and brought all of his compatriots into the room as well, which I thought was very charming. And actually kept, as far as he could, the focus on, the main agenda. And I was actually quite glad in terms of where it ultimately landed, which is that for South Africa, we need growth for the betterment of everyone. And I'm actually starting to see some of that happening on the ground within the more stable political environment we have, or relatively more stable, and also to focus on crime. And I thought Johan Rupert was right to raise that, and I think the president raised that as well. And we need to get crime rates down as a generality. So if we can focus on those two things, then, we're going to be heading in a better direction.
One of the things that I think makes this tough is that when you go into a negotiation, the aim is usually to change the mind of the other person. And you know that you will have to change your mind when you do that. Trump, certainly in my view, but I would argue this is a fact, believes things that are untrue. How do you then go into a negotiation like that with someone who won't change their mind?
Yes, I think it is quite difficult. What you don't do is win the battle in public. So I'm hopeful that the private meetings currently ongoing across many of the ministers, will help to at least partly bridge that divide. But I think the other tactic is to move him onto other things and more of a commercial footing. And if he can see something from South Africa, which he finds attractive, for example, green minerals and rare earths, which again our president was right to raise, then if Trump thinks he can get something out of it, then that's the direction to lead him in.
Hywel George, thank you very much indeed. Director of Investments at Old Mutual Investments.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025.
The Money Show
Shapeshifters.
Shapeshifters is brought to you by Volvo. It's safe to be brave with Volvo. Well, certainly bravery's been what's required this evening, I think. And Grenville Salmon, the founder of Pace Car Rental, is your shapeshifter this evening. Grenville, good evening. We're starting a little later. I think you know why.
Yes.
Thank you for being with us for all of it.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on the show.
The story the story that I keep hearing, if I put you into Google or AI or whoever answers questions on the internet these days, is that you started in the car rental business, you decided to go into it yourself, and then you rented out your mother's car. Before you rented out yours, I noticed. Firstly, how did you end up in the car rental business in the first place? What was it about that business that interested you?
I've always just been interested in business, and I've always wanted to have my own business. And I did my articles at Deloitte & Touche, and my biggest client was Imperial. And when I finished, I gave them a phone call, and they first of all told me to get lost because I wrote all these terrible things in my report. And then about 10 minutes later, they phoned me back and said, come and fix all those things. And and I just loved it. And I had such an awesome mentor there at Imperial, a guy called Leon. And he gave me runway, and he always challenged me to do better. And I just enjoyed it. And when eventually I left Imperial, I thought, I'm going to do it. I'll start a car rental on the side.
So you're starting it on the side, but you need a car to rent out first, right?
Yes.
And is the mother's story, the mother's car, true?
Yeah, so what happened was that I bought a Toyota Quantum 14-seater because I realized that the big car rental companies wouldn't be able to fit them in their parking at the airport. So I thought everybody's going to have to deliver them if customers want them. So I bought a 14-seater, and as luck would have it, the first person that phoned and said, well, do you have a Group B car? And my car was a little bit old. So I said to my mom, okay, well, let me rent out your car, and then you can drive my car, and I'll drive the Quantum. So that's how the first rental happened. I rented my mom's car to my friend, actually.
Nowadays, if you were starting something like this, you could probably just use Instagram or something, or you would go online and you would have sort of Google business to advertise it. How did you do it then? Because you weren't taking out big adverts in, what were those things called? Magazines?
Yeah. Yeah. I created a website, and I waited, and the phone never rang. And then I started using Gumtree. And but the other thing that we did was we also phoned a lot of the other car rental companies and said, listen, if you run out of 14-seaters or minibuses, phone us. And they actually did. And they would phone us, and they had customers, we didn't, but they would run out of vehicles. So it's called sub-hiring. They would sub-hire our 14-seater bus.
You're starting a business, right? You've got a couple of these cars on the road, not many. What kind of facility were you running them out of? I mean, were you parking them in your back garden, or maybe your mom's back garden?
When I bought a house on an auction in Sandringham, and it must have been some guy who was a builder, because every room was a little bit different, and it had it had everything. It had a walk-in safe, and it had 5 garages and an aviary, and but it had 5 garages, and they were double length. And we started the business in the garage.
And how many cars? So you started.
We just had an idea in the beginning, and then we bought a car.
So one of the things that, and I've been thinking about speaking to you all day, and I was thinking, if it were me, when you go to bed every night and the car's out, right? The car, you don't know where it is. I mean, I don't even know if you had a tracker in it. You must be thinking, what happens if something happens to the car? Because that's the end of the business, right?
Yes. 100%. Well, we had insurance, but car rental insurance doesn't cover you for absconsion.
Yeah.
So when we rented a car to a person, we would stalk them on the internet, find out, confirm their employment. We knew exactly who we were renting to because we were so scared. The big car rental companies rely on the credit card, but we we didn't even trust credit cards. We would still go and phone the next of kin or the employer and make sure we knew who those people were. So, yeah, it was scary. And often in the beginning, people used to say, don't you put trackers? I said, I wouldn't sleep if I knew where my cars were. I'd rather live in ignorance.
So it's you, your wife at the time, I think?
Yes, and Rusty, our dog.
Your dog?
And Gift, the gardener.
And Mom, when she wasn't looking. When did you suddenly realize, actually, this was going to work and I need to employ people? Because you do employ people now. Well, I'm hoping.
Yeah. No, we've got more than 400 employees now. And, I at the time, I never looked up. You just looking at the next step. You never look at the top of the mountain or you'll give up. And, then we employed a guy, Division, and he still works for us today. And he lived in Orange Grove, and he used to walk down the hill to work, and then we'd give him a lift home because it was uphill. He used to wash cars. He's now a fleet manager. But yeah, we started employing people, drivers, and then marketers, but the stress was unbelievable. It was so difficult to keep people because these cash rentals and, like you're saying, not knowing where the cars were, and then people wouldn't pay. It was just so we would lose people along the way, and also the company grows. So somebody's doing well when you've got 40 cars. But then suddenly when they've got to manage 60 cars, they can't cope, So
I mean, like you're literally chasing money.
Yeah.
So someone's, maybe they've returned it, whatever. I mean, that must have taken so much of your time.
Yeah, well, it did. You mean
so
trying to make people pay and extensions. And look, we had a lot of time because we never had a lot of vehicles. So we could cope with it, but it wasn't easy. And when the cars are standing, you have to be marketing, and then when they're on the road, you're working. So and my wife used to, before we had employees, she used to do it all on her own with Gift. So he used to wash the cars, and then she would use cabs for women. There was no Uber then, so she would get a cab and then arrange it to meet her there, and then take her to the next place, collect the car, go get it washed, then deliver that same car to the next customer, because you would plan it so well, Or she would, actually, not me.
So all of this is going on, but there are other more established car companies. I mean, there's one, I won't mention which one, it's been going for a long time. Every time I go to the Cape Town International Airport, I wait in a queue for an hour. It drives me insane.
Yeah.
How are you competing with the others? I mean, you were growing clearly more strongly than they were. Some of these are established names. They could bring in IT from the US, whatever. What do you think was going well for you that you were able to take market share from them?
We often talk about it. My wife and I talk about it, but I think in South Africa, quite often just doing what you say you're going to do is enough. And we would always say, they ask the car to be delivered then, we deliver it then. But quite often it's not happening with the other guys. And but we also have great service. So, and I don't know if you read, but there hasn't been a new company allowed to operate at the airport for 17 years now.
Gee.
And so we've never been allowed to actually get a kiosk at the airport. So we're delivering cars to customers at the airport. And the nice thing for the customers there is the car waits for you, not you waiting for the car. And we also use facial recognition. We've got a guy, Brandon, and he'll remember your face and greet you.
At some point, you decided to do some business with Uber drivers.
Yes.
And you actually were renting out cars to them. So these are people with skills. They got driver's licenses. They got the will to work. They just need the car. It's quite an interesting business model, and it gets sometimes a little controversial. But, I mean, just to convince them to take it on must have been a bit tough.
Yeah. So that was in the beginning when a couple of Uber drivers pitched up and they wanted to rent cars, but you know that you have limited kilometers when you rent a car. So we decided and in the beginning the Uber drivers all used to drive for an owner, and then they would get 20% of the take. And then we flipped it around and we said, we'll give you a car and you run your own business. Just give us this amount of money at the end of the week. And we started helping these Uber drivers. And then we looked at it and, they work hard, Stephen. They really work hard. And I realized we came up with this product. We looked at everything they did. So we said, no, if you work 25 weeks, you'll get a week free. So you can visit, you can go home and do what you want. Then we realized sometimes they just stopped working on a Monday, and we asked them why. And then you didn't have cash trips. So they would run out of money for petrol, and then they would just stop working, or they would run out of data. So we gave them in the beginning fuel cards, data. We looked at everything that those Uber drivers needed. And then I made up some pamphlets for the product. And, you can see where they are on the app. So I would drive around to find them and hand out the pamphlets. But they would think I'm trying to hijack them. So they would just move. It took me 3 hours to hand out 7 pamphlets. And the next morning I got to work and I was thinking to myself, these are the most expensive pamphlets ever handed out by a chartered accountant in the history of the world. And then I had this brainwave. I was like, well, for 20 Rand, they come to you.
Yeah.
So I started calling trips, and then the Uber drivers would pitch up outside the office. I would say, can I show you my presentation? And the next thing, there were queues of Uber drivers. And the tea lady, some of them couldn't speak English. The tea lady became the interpreter, and the sales lady, and I phoned Temba. We didn't even have a boardroom then. I had to get people we had to get Temba in and put up drywalls and make a boardroom so we could meet the guys. And it just exploded. It was brilliant.
I can see you still enjoy the business. I can see the joy coming from your face when you talk about it. It's quite something.
No, it was fun. And
Grenville, it's a great story. I'm sorry we haven't had more time today because of events in the White House. Grenville Salmon is the founder of Pace Car Rental, your shapeshifter this evening.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025.
Well, drama in the White House. Of course, if there are any developments, you'll get that from our team, Tsidi Madia and Clement Manyatela, who are there. Just the most extraordinary meeting between President Cyril Ramaphosa and the US President Donald Trump. And I imagine going on behind closed doors, very difficult in many different ways. And, of course, a lot more to come of it. We'll have more on that for tomorrow, more on the budget tomorrow, I suspect, as well. And there'll be a lot more to come on this radio station through the evening. Aubrey is next. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Good evening, 8 o'clock.